Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Jason Tham. He is the co founder and CEO at Nulogy. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the relationship between manufacturing and warehousing, and also the digitalization of some of those processes and overall data synchronization, and how that data brings together both the manufacturing, the warehousing side, and how that can be applied to through Nulogy within a 3PL, for example, that maybe is doing kitting or co-packing, and how that kind of comes to table and brings the whole supply chain together. So we're going to dive into that with Jason. But Jason, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good. Thanks, Kevin, for having me here.
Definitely happy to have you on. Happy to talk about this. I think it's an interesting topic for sure. But before we dive into all of that, why don't you give us kind of a brief overview of Nulogy and tell us you're your co-founder. So tell us a little bit about the founding story and kind of how this came to be.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that. Nulogy, we're a software company that's focused on building a multi-enterprise platform for manufacturers and brands and connect brands and their external supply chain networks to drive better visibility and orchestration, which is going to be, I'm sure, one of the topics that we're going to be delving into today.
Yeah.
We're a global company in about 15, almost maybe 20 countries that's serving customers and some of the leading brands, 3PLs, and manufacturers. So really excited to discuss this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that orchestration is such an important part of the supply chain, especially as we start to see more and more things coming in and happening. And we'll definitely touch on that. But tell us a little bit about kind of where did the idea of Nulogy come from?
Yeah, so the founding story, the genesis story, if you will, between myself and our co-founders was going back to just my exposure to the problem that seen when working in consumer package goods, fast-moving consumer goods, companies, particularly in the food space. I worked at Kellogg's, in manufacturing on the production lines. And seeing that manufacturing process and then just learning of how the supply chain was set up and some of the problems that seen, particularly collecting data from the manufacturing lines, but even more so if it was your own manufacturing line, that was difficult. um, but getting information from third parties and the contract manufacturers and contract packagers that were making product on behalf of our own brand was even more difficult. And that was so important because if we didn't have the state status of how a product was being made, the status of the bill of materials of the lots, not only for quality but for potential recall purposes, but for planning purposes, to be able to ultimately serve our end customer, whether it be that consumer, whether it be that retail. It was really disjointed. So I worked in contract manufacturing, but also worked at the brand too, and the exposure of the lack of visibility, the amount of what a bullwhip effect
Mm,
could be, because I would describe it as that lack of synchronization or asynchronous information that was just a black box, where that latency led to a lot of waste. Um, uh, just led myself and to found the company with my co-founders, and we had some history previously, actually working building networks in the telecom space. So exposure of networks and what a digital network can uh, yield in terms of just synchronization of information and building mission critical applications. I was an engineer, still am an engineer, but just that exposure to networks, consumer goods, supply chains, and contract manufacturing and supply chain led me to that founding of the company. Certainly, I'd also share that my father, who's was also one of the co-founders too. He's been always involved in the company. He's his PhD and his doctoral work was in supply chain. He was a professor here in Toronto.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
growing up around the dinner table with getting on the personal side, my twin sister, just like learning like what is supply chain manufacturing. He was teaching and doing his thesis in AI and all that kind of stuff, and through osmosis, I would say, growing up. Inspired, I think, a little bit of a going to engineering and going to the into the business and like learning and being exposed to, oh yeah, that actually is a problem, and no one's solving for this, so how can you create a product to solve for this problem? That was really the genesis and founding story of Nulogy.
Wow, that's very interesting, and I think that's probably a very interesting, dinner table conversation. I could imagine, right? And seeing all that supply chain. So, obviously, I think you probably got exposure to supply chain at a much younger age than the average person does. I can imagine with that experience there. So it's only right that you're, now working within the supply chain and have followed along in those footsteps and bringing solutions to the table as well. So I think it's very interesting there. You talked a little bit about kind of some of the disconnects and lack of synchronization in between different parts of the supply chain, especially on the kind of the manufacturing side, and understanding like what is status of our product and when are things coming, and all these different things, which I think manufacturing, and we're the new warehouse podcast, right? So we love the warehouse side of the supply chain, but manufacturing, I think, naturally kind of leads into the warehouse itself, right? And there's a relationship there where things are produced, and then either they're put into the warehouse that's part of the manufacturing facility, or they're sent to a warehouse distribution center, fulfillment center after production. So tell us a little bit about kind of, I guess, the traditional look of what that relationship would be like between a manufacturing operation and the warehouse operation side of things. What does that look like traditionally, and then how does that kind of transform and look after digitalization kind of comes into play?
Yeah. So I'll just go a bit of the history. I think of this, that a brand or a manufacturer often in the past would like own everything. They'd own their warehousing, own their manufacturing, own their assets. And under that premise, you'd have an ERP, an enterprise resource
Mm,
planning system, that can effectively give a view of your enterprise and your assets. Now, fast forwarding, you have this complexity that's in the supply chain, that you have this specialization that and I think this is very follows a specialization of species, or an evolution, let's call it, where you have warehouse, third parties logistics who are specializing what they do best, which is warehousing. You have some contract manufacturers which are doing manufacturing, which they do best, and brands, which is specializing in sort of the brand. And I won't go to that whole macro, but you asked me the question of what's the purpose of and the relationship between manufacturing and warehousing. And having studied in the past sort of lean manufacturing, and buffers and stocks and things like this, in the past, holding warehouse or inventory was kind of like a bad word. It was like, oh, I'm just carrying costs for this inventory, and I'm making product. I'm making something to stock, made to stock. And the reason why I will do that is because there'll be invariably some fluctuations in the supply chain, and that buffer will then guard against, you know, maybe peaks of demand or things like this. So I won't have be out of stock. But then you have this also this almost competing concept in my mind of like leaning out. Like you want to have just enough
mm,
manufactured stock, so you don't have this large carrying cost in the warehouse. um, I'll put that aside and also then talk about this, what's driving consumer behavior. You have this customization of everyone today is not just mass manufacturing a product, but there's a multitude of SKUs. But even so, like even in the e-commerce extreme, you have products that are made just for you.
mm,
So that customization is like, how can you hold stock just for you? So you really want to not only get to a made to stock, but also almost like a made to order, or a made to order. Like if I could just get an order from that retailer or from you as a consumer, then I'll only make it then and there. And that makes sense because if you're adding value to a finished good, let's say converting that raw material to some intermediary product, then packaging it, customizing that package, maybe putting a gift box around it, or maybe making a display for a retailer. You want to postpone that activity to the latest point, because if you're investing in putting capital towards that manufacturing process too early on, and then invariably, let's say that thing doesn't sell, a demand signal doesn't come in, then you've put capital to work, and it doesn't ultimately sell that finished good. So I say this because that interrelationship between manufacturing and warehousing is very interesting, because you need space to manufacture, you need space to warehouse. And I think that one of the things that we all know is, like, as you transport product from one destination to another, or one node within the supply chain to another node within the supply chain, there's cost, right?
Mm,
There is transport cost, there's time, there's damages that can occur, there's handling, all the risks. And if you can reduce the touches within that supply chain, then that brand or end consumer can save on that cost. And obviously, the lowest cost producer, that's a barrier to entry, so you want to reduce that cost. And what I think some warehouse companies, third party logistics companies, really got that insight is, like, wait a second, if I can leverage postponement, if I can capitalize on customization, if I can reduce the touches in that supply chain, offer my customer the ability to not only warehouse the product, but do some manufacturing, some kitting, some co-packing, that is going to be less made to stock, hence lower carrying costs, um, and provide a made to order experience, so that it is greater customization, lower costs, leveraging already space that is in my warehouse, and providing that ability to manufacture and postpone that activity closer to the point of consumption.
right.
What that will allow us to do then is to have a product that is higher quality, more customized, postponed, lower cost, and so forth. So that's sort of the relationship that I see warehousing, not just being sort of like a box to hold inventory, but one that's much more value added, that can put and convert a intermediary product to some greater, more value added, closer to the finished good, or a packaged finished good in itself, that's going to then go to the final destination. So it's a win-win for all, and I think that that's where you know is the macro, but digitalizing all that then is that next S curve.
Mm,
Why is it that next X curve? It's because if I know where that product is, if I have effectively put a digital skin on my warehousing and manufacturing process, and that digital skin then eliminates a domino effect, or that bull effect. So I can get the demand signal and match the supply as close to possible to that. That minimizes the waste, that increases the quality, that reduces the cost, that improves the service, or on time and in full. So that synchronization, uh, and that virtual vertical integration between the manufacturing, warehousing, all the various nodes in that multi-tier sort of process, which are multi-parties. Remember, we talked about, or I mentioned about the specialization of of organizations within the supply chain.
Right.
Uh, there's no ERP that governs multiple parties.
Mm,
Hence, you need a multi-enterprise solution that can kind of collaborate, orchestrate, synchronize across multiple parties, multiple organizations to bring that data in and inform all those parties to work together in harmony.
mm. Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a great point there to bring in that kind of that harmony as you just mentioned. I mean, and I think that kind of goes back to in the beginning you mentioned orchestration, right? I mean, when we look at an orchestra, or we look at from a music standpoint, where we want to have those different pieces come together, which creates that harmony and that overall equal and unified sound, right? And we bring that onto the operations, the supply chain world. We're putting all those pieces together and having them, humming at the same speed, I guess, so to speak, right? And it makes sense to bring all that synchronization in. So, I mean, tell us from that regard. Obviously, data is such a big driving factor of that synchronization, and being able to have visibility to that from multiple different organizations, like as you mentioned. So, I guess tell us a little bit about how Nulogy kind of comes into play there, and enables that and allows that type of synchronization and overall harmonization, I guess we could say too, to come together.
No, that's a great way of describing it. I actually think of that a little bit as a bit of a music guy myself. Like,
Yeah.
tiers of music or treble and bass and things like this. If they're out of sync, the music is just completely incomprehensible sometimes, right? So you want to be able to have that in sync. So Nulogy today, if you can't have data if you don't capture the data, you have to be able to capture that data. So what we focus on in Nulogy is capturing data at that shop floor level. We have
Mm,
tools and applications that allow our customers to be able to capture data at the production level line, capture data of what's being made, when it's being made, the bill of materials, the conversion of the inventory, the raw materials coming in, the ability to track and trace at that individual level, as it's going even through a production line and be converted from a machine, or as someone is kitting and co-packing a finished good. All of that planning, scheduling, and execution of that conversion of a multitude of materials to a finished good, we enable that to be captured. So that's our shop floor solution, which then is not only just for one organization, but then can be federated for that multi-party or that multi-enterprise that I described to share with your customers downstream or your suppliers upstream. And so with Nulogy, we're very focused on capturing that data, but then connecting that data in with your multiple parties and interoperating with their own systems, because you have to be agnostic to what other ERP they may be using as well. So
right.
how do you share that data in a two-way um, uh, protocol that is making them better, so drives mutual benefits to the customer and the supplier, and then collaborating on the orders, collaborating on the bill of materials, collaborating on schedules and forecasts. So everyone's sort of synchronized. Because in the past, if I, you know, got yesterday's data and the demand signals, and I don't have it in real time today, or there's some, God forbid, some production line failure, and I'm not able to hit the run rates that were expected, well, I'm going to short an order. Well, it's really good. It'd be helpful if my customer were to know that, or we can adjust the orders and things like this in real time. So avoiding that domino effect, avoiding that bullwhip, and really synchronizing to orchestrate across that supply chain to make um, everyone better. And I think we've been able to learn over time
Mhm.
that it's not any organization individually that wins,
Yeah.
it's the supply chains that win. So how do you make and lift the tide of all boats, and that's really what multi-enterprise approach does. And Nulogy helps capture that data in that manufacturing and warehouse environment, especially designed for co-packers and co-manufacturers, connects in for brands, and enables collaboration. And through our supplier collaboration, modules, collaborates upstream and downstream
Mm,
with, whether it's a warehouse company, all the top eight 3PLs in the world are on Nulogy, for example. They're using that as well with their customers, but also can use that for suppliers because they're sourcing maybe some raw goods and so forth for on behalf of their end customer. But that visibility to provide it to their end customer is also very, very beneficial. So, competing on the speed of being able to capture that information, connect it in, orchestrate it, and then using cognition. In our company, we talk about these four C's of capturing data, connecting it in, being comprehensive with the data, and then adding cognition. Because when you have all this data, now
right.
you can add intelligence to it. Can I predict? Well, am I going to be um, on time and in full? Maybe there's some disruption in the supply chain, and in that manufacturing or co-packing, and that will lead to some variance to plan, or attainment. Predicting that and using that data of the past history to adaptively learn to more better optimize my manufacturing supply chain, is sort of the that next frontier. And this is why that digitalization is truly the next curve, because at the end of the day, people are capturing the data. Often it's siloed, it might be manual, it's not able to be shared, it's not in a common data model where multiple enterprises in your supply chain can safely, securely, um, access that information and do something with it, to intelligibly make better decisions. So I think that's very exciting, from what we see from our standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a great point there around the data because you have all these different parts of the supply chain, like you mentioned in there. And, it's hard to get, maybe, one supplier's, their systems are older, right? But, you're kind of stuck with them in a sense because they do something unique or specific. And, it's how do you get that data to kind of be aligned across the entire chain and come together as one, like you said, because you're only as good as your entire supply chain, right? Not just if you're really strong at transportation, like that doesn't mean like that's going to pay dividends throughout the whole supply chain. In some cases, yes, but ultimately you're going to find those wins from having a more strengthened entirety of supply chain, right? And having that data, and like you said, taking that data and then creating some intelligence off of that is going to help you to make those better decisions. I think that's a really important thing to call out there. So now, I mean, Nulogy, the platform, the system in itself. I mean, you mentioned ERP here a couple times. I mean, so Nulogy is like a layer that's sitting above everybody's system, or is it replacing certain systems? What like where does it fall in kind of that stack?
Yeah, it's a good question. Often at that shop floor level, there is not
Mm,
much, believe it or not.
yeah.
There is a lot of job dockets or job runners or quality sheets that are being captured, maybe digitalized after. But we have a system that's purpose built for that warehouse environment. It could be a manufacturing, you environment within a warehouse, in DC, in distribution center, warehouse co-packing environment, or it could just be a contract manufacturer that's independent. And ERP in the past has been very focused sort of on the back end of the systems, like maybe accounting, and so forth, some planning. But actually capturing data on that shop floor is difficult. So we have a shop floor solution that will be very complementary. Integrate with over a dozen ERPs that are common, whether it be Microsoft to a NetSuite to wherever it is. So we're agnostic to that. maybe there's a warehouse management system. A lot of our customers, whether it be a DHL or a FedEx, or they are sometimes you have their own WMS. And we will integrate with their WMS. But sometimes when we're also a very purpose built WMS for contract manufacturers too, and co-packers. So I think it's complementarity is more important than just replacing. So what's very important is recognizing that you can integrate with all these sort of other systems, hence multi-enterprise.
Mm,
And we're a bit of that interstitial tissue between these solutions to collaborate and orchestrate that does sit, above the sort of traditional enterprise WMS systems. If you asked our customers, what is your shop floor system? They'll say Nulogy. What's your quality system? They'll say Nulogy. But also then what is your collaboration platform? It will also often be said that it is Nulogy too,
mm,
uh, specifically for the external supply chain. We have customers that are using us for their internal manufacturing operations too, but we're very purposeful for the external um, uh, supply chain, which is contract manufacturers, contract packagers, and 3PLs, because ultimately there are these brands that are, making something, warehousing something with external parties, and getting that visibility is very beneficial.
yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's very interesting to see kind of, I guess the different types of fits you have to, and where you can find yourself, or where you can find Nulogy, I guess, in different parts of the supply chain, and where that comes into play, and then obviously strengthening it by connecting all those different parts like we've talked about here. So very interesting to learn a little bit about Nulogy here, and also the importance of that digitalization and overall synchronization throughout the supply chain, and how Nulogy is enabling that. So I'm curious if we look to the future, not only I think from Nulogy perspective, but since you have such a deep wealth and have grown up around supply chain and all these things, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on kind of like what does the future of our supply chain look like, and where do you think we're heading? What really stands out to you right now?
I think the future of supply chain is one that's extremely responsive, uh, autonomous in many ways because of this ability to get this data. One that's the way more resilient and less brittle. I use another example. Like EDI, people will say, "Oh, now I'm connected," right? But
Yeah.
EDI is brittle. It actually takes a lot. It's like email. Like when
Mm,
is email going to be obsolete? Today you're on, I don't know, other networks. You're on
yeah.
LinkedIn. You're on social networks. So there's going to be this concept of networks, and being on a network is going to be a heck of a lot more resilient, more responsive, more autonomous because it's going to be smarter. And that's going to ultimately reduce waste. And I think that supply chains are one of those areas that have a very, altruistic and through digitalization
Mm,
outcome that is going to drive more sustainability, because ultimately you and I and everything that we consume has some supply chain, something that we eat from the fridge or go out to buy. So if we can reduce the waste and not make things that might be wasteful, hence more of the weight made more towards a made to order, to lean out the supply chains. I think that's a going to be a safer, because it's more traceable supply chain, and one that's much less wasteful and more sustainable.
mm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really good point there, and I think we're seeing definitely a push towards that. Certainly a long way to go, I think, to make a really large impact. But I think it's interesting that we, as the supply chain, especially if we look towards like logistics, manufacturing, transportation side of the supply chain, like we have a huge opportunity, I think, because we make such a big impact on that sustainability aspect, and just the environment in general. So I think it'd be really interesting to see how that continues to evolve, and how some of this synchronization throughout and communication helps to reduce a lot of that waste in between. And so Very interesting stuff to talk to you about here, Jason, and really appreciate you sharing your insights and coming on to talk to us about Nulogy and the overall synchronization and digitalization of the supply chain. So if people are interested in learning more about Nulogy or getting in touch, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, obviously our website, nulogy.com, nulogy.com. That's probably the best way of learning more. There's been a lot of research out there for those who follow the analysts, whether it be Gartner or others. There's research reports. This is truly an exciting time. I would say the best time to be in supply chain, and certainly in the digital supply chain, because there's so much going on.
Mm,
And in the past, there was this like view of like eventually this will happen. But the truth of the matter today is the mindset's there and the technology is available. It's not like it's not there. AI hasn't arrived. Um, AI is here. It is being used. Networks and cloud and the social supply chain or networks, like, people are okay and they recognize that actually sharing information will make things better. So I think with all that being there, it's just a super exciting time, and would love to engage. And if there's anyone listening to this podcast, you can reach out. My email too is jasont@nulogy.com. I can talk about this, all day clearly, Kevin. As we filled up 30 minutes at least of this time, but
yeah.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on, and definitely I can tell you're very passionate about this. So definitely connect with Jason, and we'll put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com so people can easily find it and get to it. So, Jason, I want to thank you once again for your time on the show today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, the New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesAreSexy.com and get your own.